Play something, then, if you think you belong here." The words were meant as a joke, a dismissive dare tossed toward a woman they thought was part of the staff. But what happened next would silence a room full of the city's most respected professionals. Maye Musk had spent her life walking through the back doors of glittering events, working, raising 3 children alone, surviving heartbreak and hunger, and somehow standing tall again. Now, at 76, she had been invited to attend an international nutrition conference in Paris, her name printed discreetly on the program. But that morning, she arrived early, dressed simply in a grey cardigan and soft shoes, blending so well into the rush of waiters, stagehands, and florists that no one spared her a second glance. The Grand Palais was stunning, a cathedral of glass and steel flooded with bright morning light. Staff bustled around in choreographed confusion, setting crystal glasses on white linen tables, adjusting placards with celebrity names, arranging floral garlands. Near the far wall stood a polished black grand piano, its lid propped open like an elegant mouth waiting to sing. But something was wrong. The air vibrated with a sour note, sharp and thin, slicing through the gentle hum of conversation. A group of musicians gathered around the piano, frowning, tapping at its keys with growing frustration. Their leader, a man in a dark vest with silver trim, waved away a technician who was carrying a tangled bundle of cables. "It's still off," he barked, his accent clipped and impatient. "That G is dead." Maye watched from a respectful distance. She could not help herself. Old habits tugged her closer. Once, a lifetime ago, she had taught herself to read music on a battered piano in a dusty room in Pretoria, fingers stumbling until they found a language no one could take away. Now, something in the posture of the instrument, the shape of its keys, drew her in. She reached out, almost unconsciously, brushing her fingertips along the edge of the frame, a gesture so small and gentle that she hardly noticed doing it. The bandleader noticed. His eyes narrowed with the impatience of a man guarding expensive tools from clumsy hands. "Excuse me, madam," he said sharply. "Do not touch that." Maye stepped back, startled, a polite apology ready on her lips. But before she could speak, he took a closer look at her, noting how naturally her hand had rested on the keys. He frowned again, suspicious, then a new calculation seemed to spark in his gaze. "You there," he said, pointing at her like a director cueing an understudy. "Help me test these notes. You look like you know a scale or two." Maye paused. A small wave of embarrassment ran through her. Around them, a few guests had already arrived, drifting toward the piano in curious clusters. A young woman with a camera, setting up for social media coverage, trained her lens on the scene. "I'm not part of the technical team," Maye tried to explain gently, but the bandleader waved off her protest. "Just play something, please. We're already behind schedule." His tone made it sound like a command, and with the small crowd starting to watch, there was nowhere to slip away unnoticed. Maye caught a glimpse of a child, maybe 10 years old, standing behind a flower stand, peeking out with bright, eager eyes. The girl seemed to expect something beautiful was about to happen. A strange calm washed over Maye. She felt her shoulders loosen. In that moment, she remembered another battered piano, the one she had leaned on to steady her breath through long nights, raising 3 children alone. She remembered her mother's voice, telling her music could heal a bruised spirit. She stepped forward, laying her canvas bag on a nearby chair. The bandleader handed her a folded sheet of music, more out of habit than trust, as if to protect the instrument from a random amateur. "Simple chords," he said impatiently. "Just check the left keys. That's all." Maye nodded, breathing slowly, letting the swirl of movement and voices around her fade into quiet. In the next hour, she was supposed to stand on the main stage and address this crowd about resilience and nutrition. No one would guess that the woman they'd soon introduce as a global ambassador for health and aging was now being mistaken for a backstage helper. Her fingers hovered above the ivory keys. They still curved in the way they had when she was 12 years old, chasing the shapes of half-remembered sonatas, jazz chords, gospel refrains. A hush settled over the circle of onlookers. Maye closed her eyes, letting the moment stretch, the same way a violinist might raise the bow just before the first note. No one here knew who she really was. Not yet. The bandleader stepped back with a faintly amused smirk, folding his arms as if expecting a clumsy spectacle. Around them, the morning chatter of the Grand Palais had grown quieter, attention focusing like a stage light. Maye let her eyes settle on the keys, breathing slow and even, willing her heart to stay steady. Somewhere in the swirling tension, she could sense the disbelief in the way the musicians watched her, eyebrows raised, waiting to see an old woman fumble. "She looks nervous," one of the younger violinists whispered, not even bothering to lower his voice. "What do you expect? She probably hasn't touched a real piano in decades." Another added with a laugh, "If ever." The bandleader shook his head, half annoyed, half entertained. "Madam, if you cannot manage this, please say so. We cannot waste more time." Maye swallowed, feeling the sting of shame rise in her chest. The instrument in front of her felt familiar yet distant, like an old friend she was afraid to meet again. Her hands hovered above the keys, remembering so many nights long ago when music had been the only soft place in a world that seemed determined to break her. Still, the heat of their mocking eyes pressed against her skin, reminding her she stood here as a nobody, as someone they assumed had no right to even sit at such an instrument. In the far corner of the room, the little girl from before was still watching. She stood on tiptoe behind a vase of white lilies, eyes bright with hope, small hands clasped together as if praying. Somehow, that single gaze cut through the sneers and the impatience, and Maye found something steady inside herself. One of the musicians, noticing the child, followed her gaze back to Maye. He snickered. "Are you putting on a children's show? Maybe start with chopsticks." A ripple of laughter rose around the piano. Even a few guests who had wandered in early to preview the decor chuckled politely, unsure whether to pity or mock. A woman holding a phone moved closer, angling for a clearer shot. Live streams, Maye thought grimly. Nothing stayed hidden now. Her hands felt cold against the keys. The bandleader tapped his watch impatiently. "Well, madam, if you do not wish to embarrass yourself, step aside. We will find someone competent." Maye closed her eyes for a second. The temptation to stand and walk away was strong. After all, what right did she have to demand respect from strangers who could only see a grey-haired woman in sensible shoes? What right did she have to stand her ground? But then she felt the curve of her fingers again, the way they had always known the pattern of a chord, even in the darkest days of her life. She saw the little girl's face, waiting, believing in something. Maybe she was no great concert pianist. Maybe she was nothing more than a survivor who had once taught herself to play on a cracked piano in a rented flat while her children slept. But that was enough. She straightened her shoulders, breathing in the scent of polished wood and roses that filled the hall. "Madam," the bandleader snapped again, voice edged with scorn. "If you would kindly move along." Maye looked up at him, calm but unflinching. "I will try." He blinked as if surprised she had answered at all, then gestured with a theatrical sweep of his hand. "By all means, impress us." A few onlookers raised their phones, the soft red dots of recording lights blinking in the corner of her eye. The sense of exposure was sharp, slicing at her confidence. She felt the tremor in her breath. She heard the echo of every voice that had ever told her she was too old, too plain, too ordinary to be seen. But she stayed. Her left hand pressed down on a single key, testing its voice. The note emerged hesitant and sour, warped by the damaged hammer inside the piano. A chorus of small giggles rose from behind her. "Perfect," one of the violinists joked. "An instrument as broken as its player." Maye ignored him. She pressed a second key, then a third, adjusting the pressure, letting her ear tune to the piano's flaws. It was rough, imperfect, but alive. And so was she. For a moment, the grand hall seemed to fade away, replaced by a dim kitchen in Pretoria where she had once played for her children, too broke for sheet music, guided only by memory and instinct. She let her fingers rest again, breathing out slowly. In the reflection of the piano's glossy lid, she caught a glimpse of herself, a woman with weathered hands and bright, undimmed eyes. They did not know her story. They did not know she was the keynote speaker who would later stand on that same stage and talk of resilience. They would. Maye lowered her shoulders, lifted her chin, and nodded once. "All right," she said, voice steady. "I will begin." The first note trembled into the air, thin and hesitant, like a voice learning to speak again. Maye held the key just a heartbeat longer, feeling its imperfect vibrations spread up through her bones. A faint buzz of misalignment, the echo of metal tired from years of neglect, but still willing to sing if given the chance. She closed her eyes, letting the moment expand until the walls of the Grand Palais seemed to dissolve. She was 8 years old again in a sun-baked town on the edge of the Kalahari, where red dust coated everything and the wind rattled tin rooftops at night. Her parents had brought home a weather-beaten upright piano from a mission sale. It was missing 3 ivory caps and 1 pedal stuck like a rusted hinge, but May had loved it at first sight. Its keys felt like portals to another world, one where no one shouted, where no one judged. Her mother had taught her the simplest songs, the way a lullaby might ease a child into safety. But safety was a fragile thing in that house. Her father, brilliant and distant, could light up a dinner table with stories of lost cities and wild flights across the desert, but he could also disappear behind walls of silence that crushed the whole family under their weight. May had learned early how to hide her fears behind music, how to press the sadness into chords until they sounded almost gentle. Then years later, when she was grown and had children of her own, music went silent for a long time. She could still taste the stale air of the apartment in Pretoria where she fled after leaving her husband. Nights felt endless then, every hour measured by the rise and fall of a crying child, the rattling breath of illness, the stretch of a single loaf of bread to feed 3 mouths. There was no money for lessons, no time for concerts, no one to tell her she was worthy of anything more than survival. And yet in the corner of that bare living room stood the battered piano she had managed to drag up the stairs from a thrift shop, paying for it in installments even when she could barely afford food. Sometimes after her children fell asleep she would sit alone, fingertips hovering over those yellowed keys, remembering how sound could heal. She had no sheet music, only what she carried inside her, memories of half-forgotten jazz lines, gospel melodies from faraway radios, a secret collection of dreams she had never quite allowed herself to say aloud. Her ex-husband's words still echoed in the darkest corners of her mind. "You are nothing without me. You will fail. You will come back." She had refused to believe it. Every note she played in those stolen hours was a protest. Every soft chord was a promise to her children that they would not go back, no matter how hard the world tried to push them there. Now standing in a gilded hall in Paris, May felt the same fragile strength rise in her chest. This piano was broken, out of tune, just like the first one she had loved, and in a strange way that made it easier to touch. She pressed a second chord, then a third, and each note seemed to gather courage. The hall around her was hushed. Even the musicians had stopped their mocking whispers, leaning closer, as if trying to figure out how this woman could make anything halfway beautiful out of such a flawed instrument. May let her mind slip further backward, to the day she won her first modeling contract. She had been 20, thin as a rail from skipping meals to feed her babies, but she walked onto that stage with her head high, refusing to let them see the bruises left by the man who once said he loved her. That same night, she had come home, set her children to bed, and played a tiny piece of music on that thrift store piano, tears streaming down her cheeks, unable to name why it felt like a victory. She had lived so many lives since then, each one layered over the other like worn wallpaper, but music had stayed somewhere deep in her blood, waiting. Even in the most polished rooms where she was introduced as a nutrition expert or a model or a brand ambassador, some part of her had kept this quiet truth hidden. Music was where she was most herself, where nothing had to be proven or sold or measured. Her fingers moved more easily now, tracing a gentle arpeggio across the high keys. The notes were still imperfect, still wrong in places, but the melody began to form, raw and unvarnished. She felt something loosen in her spine, a sense of belonging that was older than any stage lights or microphones. From the corner of her eye, she saw the little girl again, eyes wide, lips parted in silent wonder. May let a small smile bloom on her face. If this was the only gift she had left to give the world, then she would give it freely. One last chord, rich and clumsy and human, rang out and settled into the air like a truth too big to hide. May took a breath, steady and calm. She would play. She would not apologize. May let her hands hover again above the keys, steady but not yet pressing down. The polished surface of the piano reflected a warped, softened version of her face, as if even the mirror was hesitant to define her. All around the grand hall, the final details of the gala were snapping into place. Stage lights tested their beams across white tablecloths. Waiters adjusted rows of gleaming crystal. Voices rose and fell in staccato rhythms, the language of last-minute perfection. Then a clipped voice cut through the air, amplified and official. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will open the main doors to our distinguished guests in 5 minutes. Please be in final positions." The MC's words rattled through the marble and glass, and a wave of anxiety rippled outward. The bandleader snapped his fingers at a young violinist, his face tight. "I told you to run the scales again. We cannot sound like amateurs." Maye kept her eyes low, focusing on the worn keys, trying to calm the thunder inside her chest. The way they looked at her burned through every protective layer she had built over the decades. Just a kindly old woman, a nobody who happened to be near the piano. Surely they thought her usefulness ended the second she lifted her hands away. One violinist sneered under his breath. "She is going to break that thing before we even start." Another laughed. "Too loud. If she can even hit a note at her age." Their words slid under her skin, cold and cutting. She had heard worse, of course. Years of polite dismissals and condescending smiles, all the tiny dismissals a woman collects until she almost believes them. But still, it stung. Maye took a long breath, pulling in the fragrance of the fresh-cut lilies decorating the stage. She reminded herself she was not here to please them. She was not here for their permission. Still, her stomach twisted. For a brief instant she wondered if maybe they were right. She was not a concert pianist. She had no polished resume of music competitions or formal degrees. Would her clumsy hands only humiliate her one final time, right in front of strangers who would remember her name for the wrong reasons? The thought landed like a stone in her chest. She looked to the side and caught a glimpse of the little girl again, watching through a small gap between two floral displays. That steady, hopeful gaze seemed to glow in the filtered light. It steadied her. Maye had played this way before, in the silence of a lonely kitchen, in a room too cold to dream, where no one cheered and no one laughed. She had played only for herself. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that had always been enough. The bandleader raised a brow, clearly impatient. "Madam, we really have no time for this. One chord. That is all we ask." He sounded almost bored, as if ready to dismiss her before she even began. Maye paused once more, her fingers still frozen above the keys. She let the silence stretch until it became its own kind of music. That pause felt like an entire lifetime. She heard the echo of her mother's voice from far away, whispering that music could be sanctuary, a safe place that no one could steal. Her shoulders loosened. Her jaw unclenched. She could do this. No sheet music. No preparation. No one expecting more than failure. That might be the perfect moment to finally speak her truth. The MC's voice rang out again. 2 minutes until doors open. Thank you. People were gathering just outside, their silhouettes waiting behind the etched glass of the entryway. Some carried phones, others held programs, all of them expecting a show polished to perfection. Maye exhaled, letting the air carry her fears with it. In her mind she saw the battered upright back in Pretoria, the lullabies she had invented to calm her crying children, the half-forgotten jazz chords she had taught herself in the hush of midnight. She had survived worse than a skeptical room. This was only a piano. This was only a song. She let her fingers fall gently onto the keys, a delicate first contact, not yet pressure, only trust. Then she looked up at the curious faces, the bandleader, the little girl, the guests behind the glass, and for the briefest second let herself wonder, what if they were right about me, what if I really was nothing? The thought burned hot then fizzled, leaving behind something clearer. She was here. She was ready. Maye inhaled slowly, steady as a heartbeat, and waited for the world to go quiet one last time. The moment her fingers truly pressed down the first chord rang out raw and imperfect, wobbling against the weary felt hammers of the neglected piano. It might have made a lesser player freeze or flinch, but Maye let the note tremble through her. She gave it space to exist as flawed as it was, breathing out a quiet acceptance that wrapped around every weakness of the instrument like an embrace. A murmur of awkward laughter rose from the nearby violinists, certain this was exactly the train wreck they expected. She ignored them. She leaned into the sour note, searching for its hidden heart. A second chord answered, built carefully to match its edge. Then a third note, higher, gentler, testing the air like a curious sparrow. Her ear tuned instinctively to the gaps and the soft clunks of worn strings, recognizing the limits and then guiding them toward something close to beauty. It was like standing in a windstorm and finding the pattern in the gusts. She let her left hand build a simple progression, firm and low, carrying the bass line like a mother holding a tired child steady. The right hand danced along in fragile arpeggios, careful not to challenge the piano's battered keys but to coax them to respond. A hush began to descend. Maye did not rush. She layered the sounds piece by piece, the way she had once layered slices of bread and tiny portions of jam to feed 3 hungry children so long ago. No waste. No grand illusions. Only enough honesty to fill the room. As the chords settled into each other, something shifted among the listeners. A violinist who had just laughed now stood still, eyes narrowing not in scorn but in something closer to disbelief. Maye closed her eyes, letting the next phrase rise up through the hollow places inside her. It was not a polished recital. There were no scales, no formal theory holding it together. It was a prayer stitched together from scraps of gospel rhythm, from a jazz riff she had caught on a cheap radio in Pretoria, from the lullabies she made up on those nights when her children could not sleep. Each note carried a fingerprint of pain and hope and the stubbornness that had kept her alive through so many storms. There was a rip in the piano's upper register where the keys rang brittle and thin. Instead of avoiding it, she leaned straight into it, turning the sharpness into a wail that ached across the high air of the hall. It was an old woman's cry, yes, but it was also a woman who had loved, who had fought, who had refused to vanish. For a second she saw the blur of her own reflection on the polished music stand and did not look away. She let herself be seen, truly seen, in the music, in all the wear and worry and invincible light that no one had ever managed to snuff out. The beat behind the doors changed. She could sense the guests filing in now, footsteps shifting as they heard what was happening. Phones lifted to capture the moment. Somewhere a child asked what song this was, but no one answered. The hall was transforming from a showcase into a sanctuary. Maye let the chords deepen their color, letting a blues tone slip in, shading the progression darker and richer. Then she shifted her right hand into a little swing syncopation, letting the rhythm trip against the expected beat, creating a moment of surprise that drew a gasp from one of the violinists. A memory washed over her so strong she almost forgot where she was. That first winter alone with her children, cramped in a concrete apartment, the air too cold to breathe. She had played on a broken thrift store piano to fight off the silence. That piano had sounded almost this rough, but she had made it talk. She had made it tell her babies that everything was going to be all right, even when she was not sure it would be. Now she played for them again, even if they were far away, grown with their own lives, even if one of them now carried the weight of the world on rockets and dreams. She played so they would remember her not as a caretaker or a silent figure in the wings, but as a woman who still had music to give. She shifted again, letting the melody rise hopeful and clear like a sunrise after long black nights. It did not matter that some keys refused to ring clean or that the damper pedal stuck. She made them part of the story, a reminder that music, like life, was never perfect. By now a small crowd had gathered. Their faces were softening, eyes wide, breathing in time with her. The laughter had stopped. Even the MC stood silent, one hand hovering over the microphone, unsure if he should interrupt this fragile spell. Maye let her left hand carry a steady heartbeat over and over, relentless, simple, unbroken, while the right hand explored flourishes that curled around it like ivy on old brick. It was the language of a woman who had known love and loss and come out still singing. When she approached a gentle cadence, she let her wrists lift almost imperceptibly, then dropped back into a new, unexpected phrase. The tension made some people draw breath sharply, not wanting it to end. In that moment, Maye realized something had shifted inside her too. The fear had gone. She was no longer worried about playing wrong notes or proving her worth to people who did not care. She was just telling the truth through every imperfect sound, and that was more powerful than any stage she had ever stood on. She thought of her mother in the Kalahari with the battered upright, whispering, "You have music in you, let it out." She thought of the little girl peeking through the lilies, now staring, wide-eyed, lips parted in wonder. And she thought of herself, of all the years she had tried to stay invisible, to survive in the shadows. No more. Her hands moved with confidence and grace, tracing a final run of chords that gathered every piece of pain and love and wove them together into one last blessing. As the final note trembled across the hall, she let it breathe, hovering in the quiet before dissolving like a tear drying in sunlight. The stillness that followed was so complete it felt holy. Maye did not move. She kept her fingers resting gently on the keys, waiting, letting them rest in that moment of absolute honesty. Then a sound rose from the back of the hall, a single pair of hands clapping slowly and surely. It spread like a spark, catching the dry tinder of awe. Applause erupted. Not polite, not cautious, but a roar of relief and gratitude, as if the crowd had been waiting all their lives for this kind of truth. Maye exhaled, shaking but strong. They had seen her. She stood slowly, turning to the sea of faces rising to their feet, all of them clapping, some wiping their eyes, others simply stunned. Among them she caught a glimpse of the little girl, now smiling so wide her face shone like a lantern. And somewhere in that ocean of applause a thought bloomed in Maye's chest, gentle and unstoppable: I am still here. I am still music. The applause still filled the Grand Palais when a tall man in a tailored navy suit stepped out from the wings. His shoes clicked sharply on the polished floor as he approached the piano. The chairman of the International Nutrition Society was known for his measured words and steady gaze, a man rarely surprised by anything. Yet now his face showed something like wonder. He waited patiently as the clapping began to soften into a hush, letting the echoes fade into the high glass ceiling. Then he placed a hand lightly on the edge of the piano, as if steadying himself. Madame Musk, he began, his voice carrying with a dignified warmth, we invited you here today as a guest to celebrate health and resilience. We had no idea we would also be welcoming an artist of such courage and honesty. The audience rippled with a fresh murmur of admiration. A few phones rose again, capturing every breathless moment. Maye swallowed her nerves, her hands still resting on the keys, feeling steadier now than they had moments before. I only wanted to help, she answered softly, her words carrying across the marble floor. The piano needed a voice. The chairman smiled gently, leaning closer so only she could hear. The piano was not the only one in this room that needed a voice, Madame Musk. He straightened, then addressed the crowd. This woman, he declared, gesturing with an open palm, has reminded us all that strength does not always arrive dressed in youth or reputation. Sometimes it stands among us quietly in grey sweaters and kind hands, and we do not see it until it sings. A wave of applause followed, richer and deeper than before. Maye felt her eyes sting and blinked away tears. One of the violinists stepped forward, awkwardly shifting his bow as if in apology. That was incredible, madam. We did not know. Maye gave him a small, forgiving nod. Do not worry, she said. I am used to being underestimated. She looked up, meeting the eyes of dozens of guests now filtering into the hall, their faces lit with respect that moments ago had not existed. Then she spoke more loudly, letting her words claim the silence. Please remember this. Never judge a person by the uniform they wear or the hands that serve you. You might be turning away a story you were meant to hear. A hush fell. A few heads bowed in thoughtful agreement. The chairman stepped forward again. Madame Musk, we would be honored if during this conference you might consider hosting a workshop. Something to combine what you know about nutrition with what you have just shown us about music. Maye blinked, surprised. A workshop? Yes, he nodded, smiling. Music heals. Food heals. You know both. Would you teach us how they belong together? For a moment, Maye felt a shiver of disbelief. After all these years of pouring her wisdom into lectures and consults, here was a chance to fold her secret love of music into that mission. She looked down at the piano, the chipped keys still glinting under the lights, and felt something click into place inside her. I would be honored, she said, and meant every syllable. A soft cheer broke out, spontaneous and full of hope. Someone clapped her shoulder, a woman in a smart red blazer beaming. Another man offered to carry her canvas bag. But Maye shook her head with a grateful smile. I can carry it myself, thank you. She rose from the bench, standing tall, framed by the piano's quiet grandeur and the sun now flooding through the glass dome above. The applause swelled one last time as she stepped forward to greet her new students, her new friends, the strangers who had been so sure of her limits only moments ago. In that golden moment she felt every note still humming inside her. Music and resilience had always lived together, and now the world was finally ready to listen. The morning after the concert, Maye returned to the Grand Palais to help organize her new workshop. The hall was quieter now, the air calm, with only a few staff setting out fresh water pitchers and folding programs. She walked across the polished floor where yesterday 100 people had stood cheering and paused by the piano as if greeting an old friend. From behind a floral display, the little girl from before appeared, shy but determined. She stepped forward, twisting her hands together until she found enough courage to speak. Madame Musk, can I ask you something? Maye smiled, gently nodding. Of course. The girl swallowed hard, then pointed to the keys. Could you teach me to play like that one day? Maye felt something warm expand in her chest. She studied the girl's hopeful face, the small glow of belief shining there. I would love to teach you, she answered. But you must promise me something first. What promise? You will never wait for permission to try. Music belongs to everyone, especially to those brave enough to touch it. The girl nodded, eyes bright, and Maye saw her own younger self reflected there, a spark that refused to die. As they stood together, the workshop team arrived carrying notepads and smiling politely. One woman stepped up with a folder of schedules. Madam Musk, we are ready whenever you are. Maye took a breath, feeling how beautifully strange it was to be seen in this new way. Not only as a model or a nutritionist, but as a woman who could bridge sound and healing, who could remind people that worth was never measured by a costume or a title. She imagined the room filled with people next week learning how food could mend a body and music could mend a soul. It felt like a story that had waited decades to be told. Her mind drifted one last time to the broken piano in Pretoria, where she had taught herself chords in a drafty kitchen to keep her children's dreams alive. It had been a lifeline in the dark, a fragile hope wrapped in melody. That same melody carried her even now across continents, through disappointments, past every voice that tried to make her small. She turned back to the girl who was still waiting for her answer. We will start today, if you like, Maye said. There is no better time. The girl's smile was enough to light the entire room. They moved to the bench side by side, Maye showing her how to hold her fingers, how to find middle C, how to trust the keys even when they stick. It was simple and humble and perfect. When the lesson was finished, Maye packed up her notes for the workshop and stepped out into the Paris air. The sky was soft with spring light warming the cobblestones beneath her feet. In her pocket she carried a printed draft of the workshop program marked in bold letters, Maye Musk, resilience through music and nutrition. She smiled quietly, letting the world's noise fade for a moment. There was no applause here, no cameras, no stage, just herself breathing steady and strong. At the hotel she paused before the tall glass doors, glancing back once at the street bustling with strangers who would never guess what she had carried through her lifetime. Then she walked inside, shoulders square, heart calm, a single phrase echoing in her mind like the last clear chord of a song: do not wait for anyone to give you permission to dream.